Hello and welcome to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, hosted by EFT trainers Michael Barnett, Dr. Silvina Irwin, and EFT supervisor Michael Preston. We are excited to bring you this first season of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast, Foundations, where Michael, Silvina, and Michael will be breaking down the fundamental elements of EFT, helping to build your confidence as an EFT clinician.
Hello and welcome back to the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. Where it's funny every time and still can't keep it together every time we do that.
Yes, every time.
I know, every time.
All right, welcome, folks.
Hi,
Welcome,
good to
everyone.
be with you all.
Good to be with you all.
Yeah.
As always, I'm Michael Preston, joined with Michael Barnett and Dr. Silvina Irwin. So good to see you all.
Great to be here, as always.
Yes, as always, great to be here, spending time with you all.
Yeah. So today we're continuing taking our questions from the EFT community. Our last episode, we talked about Move 1 challenges. And this one, we've got some questions about Move 2 challenges, which is where we spend the bulk of our sessions in Move 2. And I would say it's probably one of the most challenging spots in the Tango.
Certainly
Yeah.
can be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly can be. And by the way, I just love folks engaging with us in this way, that they're bringing their questions to us. So I really just want to appreciate our audience for bringing some questions for us to chew on together.
And just as an FYI for all of you, these are some of the most consistent questions that seem to come up across the board in supervision. So they're great questions and really appreciate you bringing them. I think each time one of you asks a question, you help so many people. So thank you for kind of paying it forward in that way.
Yep, absolutely. These are the questions that are asked all the time. And it is incredibly brave to ask questions because somebody out there is already thinking that same question. So naming it and bringing it forward helps everyone. And thank you, because I was just sharing with you all before we started that we've crossed just about 10,000 plays in 7 episodes. Well, 7 as of right now. By the time this comes out, we'll be further along. But that feels so good that it's something that the community is really enjoying and taking in. And so I feel really honored to be a part of bringing some of this with you all to the community.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah,
So
glad to-
thanks again. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in with Move 2. One of the big things that we usually do here is defining like what's really happening here. So we know what we're doing. And then we'll go into some of the more nuanced questions. But as we talk about stage 1, Move 2, what is it that we are looking for in stage 1, Move 2?
Since that episode on nesting dolls was so helpful, can speak about this part as kind of a nesting doll of sorts, right? So this is really, as you were just saying, Michael, I think the heart and soul of what we do in EFT, because it's all about organizing emotional process and then engaging it. And I know those are very clinical or academic sounding terms, but right here, what we're attempting to do, utilize our work with emotion to get beyond what most folks in their significant other relationships experience in distress, which is just trigger, reaction, or we say it differently, Q, action tendency, Q, action tendency, right? And what we trust is there is so much happening in between because of who the other person or persons are. They're their significant others. There's an incredible narrative that either people are unaware of, or in the distress that's happening in conflict, it doesn't feel safe to be that vulnerable. So we go in and we already have 2 of the 4 components of how we organize emotion. We have the cue, the beginning, where it starts, and we have the action tendency, which sadly is creating disconnection. But we trust that there is something else happening when a person who loves their partner or partners is reacting in a way that always creates disconnection. And we endeavor to discover that with them, right? We go into a process of eliciting the appraisals to find the narrative they're always in touch with, the movie that gets activated. And it's usually a very sad and painful movie. And we help people then feel their words. That's what we mean by engaging in emotion. Can we bring forward the vulnerable core emotion that's really at the heart of what the reaction's all about to begin with, right?
Yep.
Those are really important parts of how EFT works with emotional process. And most of that is contained in Move 2, whether it's in stage 1 or in stage 2. And I know we'll get there at another time. So that's what we're looking for in the highest level.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I say often is like Move 2 is where we're going through this moment where we want to help the person we're engaging with and their partner hear about, but the person we're engaging with begin to see the connection between that primary emotion and the action in the cycle.
The only other piece that that I would add too is that we're helping people to feel their story as well. We're really creating an embodied moment of that narrative that they carry. They're so often talking about it from here or kind of packed in secondary emotion. But in move two, not only are we assembling and organizing what's happening for those folks, but we're moving them into feeling it and bringing that forward as well, along with,
Mhm.
like you were saying, Michael, attaching it to an action tendency and, the other Michael, really revealing what's happening underneath the surface when oftentimes we just get kind of cue action tendency and reactivity. It's really a moment of revelation of how much
Mhm.
more is happening underneath the surface that
Yeah.
never gets the light of day.
No, that's so important what you're saying, because what that starts to do is it begins to bring to the surface the hurting human being behind this repetitive action tendency that their partner always experiences so negatively. And
Mhm.
when fully engaged, as you're saying, it's an embodied sense of their emotional world about that narrative. They're really feeling it and it's vivid. It's kind of like that notion of a picture painting 1,000 words, because when somebody expresses from that vulnerable place to their partner, which we'll talk about in move three, that's a thing that actually can pull the person to them in these really vulnerable moments, rather than the action tendency always pushing the partner away in one form or another. We see the hurting, vulnerable human being. It really non-pathologizes that moment, creates so much safety, and we get to really create the opportunities for connection when people can feel in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when I think about this, one of the phrases you said, so, and I'd like to just have you share a little bit more about it, is really bringing that forward,
Mhm.
right? Bringing that more vulnerable narrative forward. What does that mean in the room experientially? Like, what's happening between you and your client?
Yeah. So when we're working with folks and they're coming in and they're in pain and they're struggling, so often we're hearing their story from a certain level. And it tends to be a more surface level anger, frustration,
Mhm.
shutdown, right?
Yeah.
And what we want to do is help bring forward the pain, the
Mhm.
sadness, the fear that's embedded in that story that doesn't necessarily get spoken about. This is a
Mhm.
little bit what Barnett was speaking to. It really starts to humanize the person that's in, actually both partners are in distress, but it really starts to humanize the person that we're working with. So when we talk about bringing that forward, it really is making an invitation to get to know the emotion in the story. It actually reminds me of Allison Lee, who she has passed away, but she was a trainer, actually, one of the first trainers in EFT alongside Sue. And she said, every emotion has a story and every
Mhm.
story has an emotion. I'll always remember that.
Mhm.
And, she talks about it's our job to find the emotion in the story. And that's
Mhm.
what we're doing. We're beckoning that forward, which tends to be a much more vulnerable core emotional place. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that's
No, I
if there's
think
more
what
to
I'm
add
hearing
on
you,
that.
I think I hear that like sense of what it means to hold an attachment lens, a systemic lens while we're listening to these stories, right? Then when someone
Mm,
is telling us a story about lashing out, we're hearing the lashing out. We're understanding that that's going to impact their partner a certain way. We're going to see it as organized and cycle, but also we start hearing the story of pain before they start sharing it. And we
yeah.
know our job is to stay with that and invite them to begin to engage with the pain that's underneath the anger by validating the anger and kind of walking through that. It's not just can I circumvent the anger, but it is can I help them begin to explore what is happening. And it's a true like belief that we're holding that there is something vulnerable and something primary happening there. And it's our job to walk around that and help that come forward because that's what safety brings is an opportunity to do that, which the cycle doesn't let them do that.
Mm,
To put a finer point, I really like what you just said, Michael. The attachment frame is everything here, because it's not just the pain, or it's not just the hurt, or it's not just the
Right.
fear. The story that's coming forward has an attachment intent. It's the
Yep.
hurt that's happening because of who the person is that has just taken that step. That person means so much to them. And oftentimes, when someone gets reactive in the cycle, the last thing the recipient of that reaction feels is, my gosh, I'm so important to my partner. But when we start to really hone in into that painful emotional experience, it's relational. It's contextual. It's not
Mhm.
just individual therapy. Oftentimes people have a hurt that we go after or a fear that we go after, but it's because there's meaning that it was my partner that did this. And I hold my partner in such high esteem,
mhm.
the person I want to feel safe with, or to feel that they don't see me as competent in some way because it's them. I could care less if the grocery clerk doesn't feel that way
Right.
about me. But when it's my person who I love, and maybe I know a thing or three about not feeling very adequate, then
Yeah.
there's a real sting because of how important that person is. And I really loved, I don't know who said it. It could have been Allison Lee as well, but something about finding the attachment intent, right?
Hmm.
It's the action tendency. That's part of what the story starts to talk about. It's an attachment story. And when we work on that level with people, as we're helping them engage, people drop even further down into their emotional
Hmm.
experience. It's so emotionally relevant and salient, there's so much to it. So I really,
Mhm.
you brought that point in, like we bring the attachment frame into this process. These are attachment stories,
Yeah.
right? And that's really
Yeah.
important what we're saying.
If I could just add one piece, it's a
Please.
little it's adjacent, and I don't wanna go too far down a rabbit hole here, but it is but it is kind of building off of the use of the attachment frame in move 2. I know oftentimes therapists can get uncomfortable saying, "Oh, am I spending too much time with this,
Mm.
with this partner?" And when we use an attachment frame and we contextualize their experience from the relational frame, it has everything to do with their partner. It might
That's right.
live inside the partner that we're working with, but it's in the context of the relationship. So usually you will have, not all the time, but usually you will have partners that feel relevant to the process.
Hmm.
Ned, you're laughing.
Not only do they feel relevant, we can always lose sight, even those of us who've been
Mm.
doing this forever, that we're working with a relationship, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about the two or more people in this relationship. And when there's distress, the relationship is experiencing the distress that both
Yeah.
people carry, but sadly, because of the cycle, can't find their way to one another. It's always attachment related. It's always attachment related. And I think bringing that frame about what's hurting about this in the relationship, that's the game changer. That drops people so deeply into emotional experience. So even though we may be working with one person, like you were just saying, Sil, it's always contextual. It's always in the context of this pain is relational, right? There's an attachment process, attachment emotion happening. And it's really helpful to keep sight on it's the relationship that's suffering right now. It's not just
Mm.
one person's hurt, right? And that takes people very,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice too. And I think I appreciate you naming that too, Sil, because they're like that is one of the number one fears that people bring forward and move to. Like, how long can I stay with this person? How like
Hmm.
is their partner going to be upset? And there is some of that where I'm keeping a watchful eye on their partner, right? If suddenly their partner's whole body language shifts because something they said, like I'm keeping an eye on like, oh, okay, like noting this because it can be distressing, especially in the very beginning of therapy. But we do watch the other person. It's not like we want to ignore them. We're using them in our reflection.
Of
But
course.
I keep an eye on their body language just to make sure they're staying
Absolutely.
engaged in a way that tells me they can be receptive if I send an enactment. Right. That's really
Hmm.
what I'm looking for. Because as we always talk about it, EFT sessions are chess. So in my move 2, I'm thinking about my move 3 in some way. Is this partner going to be there if I ask them to share? And I'm going to be watching their body language during move 2 to make sure that they're not shutting down, crossing their arms and looking away. And then that's going to tell me, okay, I might have to do a little bit of work here to figure this
Hmm.
out. But generally after I would say probably a month or so, maybe 2 months with me on a most couples, that settles down a good bit because the rhythm of therapy has settled in.
Mhm.
Hmm.
If that hopefully
Yeah.
that's helpful to the people listening. So let me take this a step to one of our next questions, because as we're talking about this, one of the other things that come up is the idea of we want to share, we want to enact new and different things. But sometimes supervisees come to me and they say, Michael, we've enacted this place many times. And how do I know if am I getting it new and different enough? And people sometimes feel like they're just repeating their enactments in some way. So how do we help therapists think about the new and different enactment? Like, I don't think it's like if we shared fear last week, we can't share fear again because we shared fear already, right? And I think sometimes we get stuck on that. So if you guys can share a little bit about what you all,
But only twice.
but only twice, not 3 times. Yeah. So when we talk about new and different, but we're still talking about primary emotion, what does that really mean for the therapist as they work? Let's jump to Sil.
Okay, bouncing it to me. Well, one of the things that I would say, just to speak about what you were referring to, is as we go through stage 1 processes and we're exposing people to their primary core emotion, their capacity to go a little bit deeper expands
Mhm.
over time. And part of what we're doing in stage 1 is we're literally expanding people's window of tolerance to go deeper into their emotional experience and creating opportunities then to bring that vulnerability, right? When we experience our emotions more deeply, there's a vulnerability in that as well. And being able to share from increasingly vulnerable places, we're building safety in the relationship. So the emotion might be fear, but the level of engagement with it may be different.
Mm.
And that's really significant. And I feel like we can't give that short shrift in terms of the importance of being able to take people deeply into their experience, even if, the emotional category is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if the narrative is a bit the same.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
It will be.
Indeed.
I mean, essentially, where we start finding ourselves is moving more and more clearly toward the core narrative that each person holds, and they're really subjective. That moment of being the recipient of your partner's step in the dance is going to mean different things to each partner. And so as we endeavor to understand that, it's not like they have, a dozen different narratives. There's a core narrative that it's like the movie starts playing. And session, people seem to have more texture and more detail, and they expand the narrative further and further. And to dovetail and maybe incorporate what you were saying, Sil, is then they also go through a process of being able to tolerate more and more emotion. So across sessions, they can go more and more and more deeply into that moment. And then, again, you were saying something, Michael, a few minutes ago about, we're thinking about how all of this sets the stage for a good enactment ultimately.
Right.
And so the more cohesive and coherent the narrative becomes across sessions is great. It is the same story. It's just getting more rich, more detailed. And people are able to go more and more and more deeply into it as we create more and more safety in the session, and they learn more about their emotional worlds, and their partners receive it well when we enact it. So one of the things I like to say to certainly newer people to the model is don't be dissuaded by the fact that you're kind of talking about the same narrative. I think that brings up a self with a therapist issue, actually.
Yeah.
Like, in like core skills or in the externship where people are like, God, as a therapist, I felt so awful. And the person who was the client was like, that was great, man.
Yeah.
You were bringing my inner world alive in a new way. I actually got to organize my experience. So it's kind of like that, So, yeah. Anyway,
I like that.
I might even go as far as to say it's not enough to do it just once.
Yeah.
I can imagine everyone can relate to having tracked a cycle, done a move, rounds of the tango with each partner, and then fast forward a couple of sessions and it feels kind of new to them again, even if we've tracked over it once. So we do have to go there a number of times until that really takes and that awareness starts to build and their capacity to see it and feel it and stay in that emotional working zone and bring that to the partner. That takes time and repetition.
it does.
So once is usually not enough.
No, it's never enough.
Yeah.
And I would, reminded there was this guy whose dad was career military, and he was a commercial pilot, which is kind of paramilitary. Again, you don't feel, right? And he came into a couples therapy, and his wife was a therapist. And he said, I came in here thinking this was going to be couples court, and I was going to be the guy on the stand. Oh man, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But
That can
he
happen.
you've helped me find my voice. And the voice to tie it to what we were saying before was there was an attachment voice. And the reason I'm saying this is the repetition and coming back to that same place again and again. We're helping people speak the core experience they've been having, but often don't have language for, right? And help them really feel it. And then we help people bring that to the partner. So even though as EFT therapists, we might think, gosh, we're saying the same thing or we're treading the same path again, it can be so novel and so important. Oftentimes in the timeline of people's lives, they've had maybe only this experience of therapy, a tiny little piece where they're able to speak about this and have it honored and seen and brought forward, right? And then bringing it to their partner.
Yeah.
Right, 'cause that's the other part of it, right? It's not just
Right.
the move 2, it's the move 2, 3, 2, 3,
Yep.
4.
That's right.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I like the way I'm thinking about this in my head right now. It's like the idea of learning to draw. And if I learn to draw like a tiger and I keep drawing that tiger, eventually that tiger is going to get more and more detail in it. And it's going to become quite a different tiger than what I began with. And kind of what we're saying is like in the beginning, because I remember confronting myself with this issue of like, what is this new and different thing? They said new and different at training. And I knew in the first time I do an enactment, I knew that was new and different. I was like, they've never shared that before, right? New and different. And how do I recreate that? but I'm not recreating that. What I really like about what you all are saying is it's taking that and making it more expansive
Hmm.
and being able to say, look at how much, look how much more time you were able to sit in that place. Whereas before
Mhm.
you would have ducked out and done and told me another story. And I say that to my clients all the time. I just say, hey, I just wanted you to know. I so appreciate you've been talking about this with me kind of uninterrupted for the last 15 minutes. When I first met you, you didn't even know how to name this place,
Right.
Exactly.
let alone stay in it and talk to me about it for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And that is a really lovely way to help the client see you're really growing here, but not just growing with like all these new and different things, but growing in an ability to hold your own experience and be able to name it with your partner. And
Mm.
that's kind of what you all are saying. That's what the new and
Yes.
different thing is their expansive version of self lends them a greater and more depth of voice in their relationship.
That's right.
It's a lovely way of putting it, Michael. Yeah, these are not one and done processes.
And I can
Awesome.
certainly just normalize the person who brought the question forward that we've all been there thinking, oh my God, well, here we are again. Or sometimes clients have even said, well, I'm in touch with the same thing I talked about last week. Right. And we have to kind of be with that. And that can be a tricky moment. Again, self of the therapist. Am I screwing this up or should I be doing something differently or am I not going
Mhm.
far? But, ultimately saying some version of, you are talking about that same thing, but you haven't spent a lot of time there. And we're going to just spend some time in this place, right? This is
Mhm.
the place you've been holding by yourself. So let's get acquainted with it because it's really important. And it's
Yeah.
a part that your partner doesn't know very much about either. That's what we're really helping people with. And that's what we're helping people do.
So that thanks for saying time, because that takes us into one of our next questions, which was about how much time we spend in move two. And I think some of this is kind of a practical question, but also I think it comes into that self of therapist piece you're naming already is when we're spending that much time and people are saying, hey, what if I spend half of my session with one partner? Is that going to be okay? Does that work out? What would you say to those who are coming in saying, how do I spend this much time with someone?
Do you want to take that, Barnett?
We could do that. I would just start by saying we are all where we are in terms of our ability and our ability to access and be in touch with our inner emotional experience, right? Being emotionally fluent. And people come in at different places with that for really good reasons.
Mhm.
We meet people where they are, and sometimes it could take almost the entire session to adequately help people slowly but surely move forward so they begin to really have a cohesive narrative. So these various appraisals are coming together in a clear narrative. That's what we mean by organizing. It take a long time. And concurrently, then using some basic interventions about the way that we come alongside people to help them feel that, it can take a long time. So
Mhm.
again, I think this can tap into self of the therapist issues like, oh my gosh, am I just leaving the other person hanging? Sometimes the other partner or partners get upset. They do. And we
Mhm.
have to that. At the same time, though, people often have, again, for very good reasons, stayed very unaware, out of touch with their emotional worlds. And we're coming alongside them sometimes as the very first person who's ever done that. And literally, the attachment process that is all about co-regulation is happening there, right? We can feel our feelings, especially when they're distressing ones, if we have someone that cares about us in the game with us. And if we don't, we keep it at arm's length for good reason. It's too overwhelming. It's too painful. So we may be coming alongside somebody for the very first time, and it's going to take time. So I
Mhm.
would encourage people to say this is super normal.
Mhm.
It takes time. Different people process at a different pace. The most important thing you can do is be attuned and go at the pace that is working for them, as well as keeping, an eye on their partner or partners. I think it's really important to do that. But again, I think some of these issues make the therapist more uneasy than the
Yeah.
client.
Hmm.
We can think we should be going faster, we're leaving somebody hanging, we're doing it wrong. And I just want to say again, it's so natural and normal, and more likely than not, you're doing exactly what's called for in that moment.
I want to add a piece that's a little bit the other side of the coin. So 100%, agree with what you're speaking to, Michael. And we really do have to honor the timing and the pacing that's required from the client. I mean, if you've spent a lifetime avoiding your inner world, it's going to take some time to go in there, and you may not even have words. So, of course, that takes time. The other side is just in terms of our own kind of development in clinical skills, that the more we practice assembling and engaging emotional experience, the more efficient we will become as well, right? We start to develop an ear. Like I remember when I was first learning this model, And we would, we would watch a video clip of, Sue's work, for example, and she would pause and we could see, and she would make explicit all of these emotional handles, or, she had her attachment ears so fine tuned, she could pluck things out of the air that I'm like, how did she hear that? I couldn't get that. What doorways is she talking about? I'm not seeing them. And now, here I am many, many, many years later, and we do start to hear and see things through we get more refined in our lenses, more sensitive in our lens, and we can pick things out more. It actually reminds me, this past summer, we were in Costa Rica, actually, and we were on a nature walk, and we didn't have a guide. And I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, it is amazing when you're with a nature guide, they can point out, like, look at that lizard over there. Oh, actually, no, we were on a nature. We did have a nature guide.
Actually,
yes.
I'm thinking
about a different one. Yes, and we're like on the river, and he can like zoom in way across and be like, see that little green tail? You see a lizard over there. And it's like, whoa, like this highly trained eye that can see this nuance that takes time to develop. So anyway, all this to
No, I get
say,
that.
it's client process, but it's also our sensitized lenses.
So I was so excited to see sloths. I wanted to and so we're sitting in this piece of property we were staying, and the woman who's kind of like the caretaker lives like down the road here is coming up, and she said, "Oh, they're all over." She walks us around our yard, and they are hiding in plain.
They're everywhere.
Right there.
And so this is the same kind of thing you're saying. This
That's
is just,
right. Just my eyes weren't trained to see them.
That's
Wait,
right.
the sloths were in your yard and you didn't see them?
They blend in so well.
That's amazing.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But this is the same thing. Like, she could
I
see the
hope
same.
I have in my mind now an idea that Sylvina sees a sloth the way that Kristen Bell. Did you guys ever see the video of Kristen Bell responding to the fact that
Yes,
Dax brought her a sloth
almost in
for her
tears.
birthday?
I was
She's
almost
weeping.
in tears.
I've seen this.
Oh, I'll have to send it to you. It's the best, but she is weeping. And I'm just imagining Syl just going, it's a sloth.
I was almost. And I like every morning I'd go out and be like, where are the sloths? And we even saw one carrying a baby. It was amazing.
That's amazing.
I know.
Okay. That's a really great way to talk about it, that there's a trained eye and there's a trained ear for the EFT therapist. And I can even say from my experience, I mean, I did trauma therapy for 10 years, listening to story after story after story. And I listened to these stories over and over and over from countless men coming, because it was kind of a narrative therapy approach of people just telling their story. And what I noticed in all of them is there was just sadness and pain. The majority of them had made a lot of awful choices, right? They were there because life had really fallen apart, right? And by no small part by what they had chosen. But what I kept listening to their story and going, I can see the reasonable reason behind the choices they made later on, because there was a story of pain all along. And I think that experience of my own experience being a part of that, I started listening to people's narrative about what's happening to them in their relationship. That was an ear that I practiced for 10 years, listening to those stories and beginning to connecting those dots. We used to say in group when people would come, we would say, first, we're going to collect the dots and then we're going to help you connect the dots.
Oh,
right?
I love that.
So you start to see how this starts to flow together and you see the larger picture that's been happening. But you collect your dots by telling your story. And then people help you start seeing it. But it does take a lot of practice and a lot of time to keep hearing these stories and going, oh, I'm hearing it now. I'm hearing it now.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a good exercise is, if you're hopefully videotaping your work, is to watch your videos with colleagues.
Yeah.
And like, okay, when you hear an attachment theme, flag it. When you hear an emotional handle, flag it. When you see a potential doorway, flag it. I'll do this in my supervision groups so that everyone starts to, train their ears to hear this. It does take practice.
That's a great way.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is part about how we get more efficient. In time, we can take less time. But I think in the beginning, there is a bit of like a patience in this work as we come into it. And if you've ever done anything that's really fast, and the first time you do it really fast, like whether it's a roller coaster or whatever, like it feels really fast. But if you do it over and over and over, like it feels like things are slowing down despite the fact that things are going the same speed. Do you know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
So the more reps you have in this, while couples therapy can feel really fast when you first start EFT, as you stay in it, the session begins to slow down and you begin to be able to catch more and see more.
You know, I
Yes.
had experience yesterday that I give a little nod to Kelly Bork's The Superpower Alliance, but they had me
Mm.
on there to really do a thing about folding addiction into the cycle. And we used a vignette that is actually from a clip that I did about 12 years ago, a session from Core Skills. And it's a decent piece of therapy for sure. But as I watch it these days, I'm like, God, I wish I had done this differently and I would have done this differently. So in this role play, I got to really do it differently and I got to show up differently. You know how we talked about this a lot more than we have in a while, but when we started, we would talk about the name of this podcast and the subtitle was The Art, Heart, and Science of EFT. And this is about the art. This is how we become
right.
more nuanced over time. We internalize the model in more depth. So these things that are happening, particularly in the attachment, as the attachment relevance seems to come to the surface. And that's a big learning curve for most people. How do we really listen for that ear with what hurts relationally with whatever people are talking about emotionally or in the story that we're bringing forward? And that really becomes part of the art. I mean, I used to watch
Mm.
Sue's tapes incessantly because there weren't very many training options back in the day. And I'd watch her go from content into deep attachment process. I'm like, how'd she get there? What did just like transcribe. What did she say?
Mhm.
How did she listening to? What's the kind of language that evolves? But it just takes time to integrate in that way. Efficiency is given a bad rap because it seems like it's akin to being more technical. I'm going to be efficient. But the thing we're more efficient with is we hear more from our hearts. What's hurting with people? We're more in, like they were saying to you, hey, you seem to pull the story out of nowhere as you're doing this
Right.
work. But the efficiency is much more attunement from an attachment perspective, and it moves things along,
Yep.
right, in a very different way. So it's just part of our evolution as an EFT therapist. It just takes time and patience and,
Yep.
real engagement and falling down and getting back up and seeking
Yeah.
support, continuing.
Lots of that. And
Mm.
I want to also add to what Sil was saying, like watching my tape, transcribing my tape, and sitting down and thinking, rewriting it. This was the tip that I got from Michael. How could I have folded the attachment lens into that reflection differently? And then I write it out and write out
Beautiful.
what I could have said, which I can't do in my session because it's chaos and my heart rate's up and everything's going on in the empty. Right? Oh, that's true. But if you watch it and you read and you transcribe and you say, okay, I'm now seeing what they said up here. I could have put that into the reflection to fold in the systemic piece of it. So that's just a piece of practice if you care to get really, really nerdy about it. I do.
That's
Yeah.
deliberate practice, right?
Yeah. It is the
really-
deliberate practice part of it. Yeah.
exactly.
All
That's
right.
really important.
All right. I do need to move us on. So I want
Somebody.
Always.
So yeah, I realize that might be part of my role in this show, and I'm not that great at it. So here we go. So if we go on from here, right? So we've talked about organizing, we've talked about engaging this emotional process and expanding an emotional experience and expanding the window of tolerance. The next question, I'll read two of them because they kind of interplay together, which is how do we know when the client's ready for an enactment? Like when are we done with move 2, moving to move 3? What should you notice in their experience or body or in yours that signals they're heightened enough?
Go for it, Sil.
Okay. I feel like there's two parts to this question. It's funny. Barnett and I were chatting a little bit about this, and this question always comes up actually in our trainings.
Always.
Always comes up.
Good question.
The one part of that response would be, okay, the more you're in the therapist seat doing this, the more you start to get a felt sense of when that is. So some of it is just sort of that clinical muscle that gets developed when you've been doing this a number of times. However, I know that that's not super helpful. So we
Yeah.
do want to operationalize that a little bit of like, okay, so how do you know? And one is our own felt sense. When we are in attunement with our clients and really moving into their inner world and bring forward a piece of primary core emotion, there is a resonance there. We oftentimes feel our own heart sinking. We can feel the pit in our stomach. So for me, my own internal landmarks help me to know, oh, it's in the room. It's here. I'm feeling it and I'm feeling it with them. That's one, right? There's that resonance. But the other thing that we're doing is we're really paying exquisite attention to the slowness. Oftentimes when people really start to slow down, they're going inward.
Yeah.
That takes time. Usually bodies start to show their emotional experience as well. We might see, shoulders dropping. We might see very typical signs of like tearing up.
Yeah.
But sometimes people don't show obvious signs of emotion. Sometimes you
Mhm.
have very kind of girded folks that inside are spinning,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes it actually, when you have a presentation like that, you may even ask what's happening on the inside as you're talking about this place that you feel so frightened.
Mhm.
And then sometimes actually you get incredibly evocative information, and that's
Yeah.
important to know. So it's our exquisite attunement to what we're seeing unfold. Voices dropping, getting softer. You feel the softening. Those are all signs that someone's in their emotional experience, and it's a
Mhm.
place where you can start to turn and invite them to turn and bring that to their partners.
Excellent.
So that's kind of the attunement that we bring, right? How
Mhm.
do we feel this is the right time? Can we feel this kind of beginning to surface in the room? And then in just a very practical way, we want to send an enactment when people have, on all things being equal, a more acute sense of embodied emotional expression, right? We're trying to come alongside them as they share their narrative, and we have ways of reflecting and validating and putting it in the attachment frame to bring it alive more and more, so we can see maybe the tears come or the chin shaking, people
Mhm.
turning in. So I was thinking about when you were saying collecting dots and connecting dots.
Yeah.
Collected some dots. We've collected some appraisals. Now we connect them into a narrative. Is
That's
that
right.
clear? Now it's clear. Are they feeling it? And then can we send it? Because it's going to have the greatest likelihood, as we say in shop talk, of organizing social interaction. So if I'm not shutting down or lashing out and I turn to my partner with vulnerability, the likelihood of them feeling empathy and care and coming toward me is very high. So we're taking the very moment of emotional distress that usually creates the action tendency and disconnection, and we're holding people in that pure vulnerable place and having them turn directly, right? So that's what we would be looking for. But again, different people express themselves differently, and we don't always get that, right? And so part of the art is, what do you do with people who may never express themselves that way, right?
Yep.
And that's where the intuition is so important. Our therapist attunement, the development over time of being very present. This connects with the efficiency question, in my opinion, because we're really, the efficient place is how attuned are we, right?
Mhm.
Not just like technicians in the model, but how attuned are we?
Just to add, Michael, to what you were just speaking to, and then this is especially the case, with folks that are more on the more withdrawn end of the spectrum and like really just shut down, almost like they're in a deep freeze in their
Mhm.
experience. And despite all of our best efforts, it's I feel nothing or I feel numb, then what do? And you never do an enactment. Right. So we can't have our metric be always the same. So sometimes it's enough to just say, can you let your partner know that in these moments, it's almost like everything just goes cold on the inside and I feel
Yeah.
nothing. Like, that's how big this is, like, everything just gets anesthetized. Can you just let
Yeah.
them know that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not this big evocative,
Yeah. But
emotive
it's clear,
moment.
right?
It's
It's a clear
very
signal
clear.
about what's happening to me on the inside, right?
And
That's
not only
right.
is it clear, it is infinitely more than that person tends to
Yeah.
share with their partner in real time, right? Like, you all have heard this story a gajillion times, but I worked with a
I
guy who was a doctor.
I
Yeah,
know you
yeah.
got
Guy. And his dad was a doctor, and they had a tragedy at home. And he said, I saw my dad shed one tear. That's how shut down emotionally and repressed this
Mhm.
family. And so his partner, they were just so stereotypical withdraw, pursue. And she would get activated, blow it out, and she'd be done. Literally. It did not linger. For him, he was like, they would call it going clinical. And he got really upset between sessions, apparently. And in session, we were talking about that. And what he started saying is, hey, Mike, I'm churning. My stomach's churning. It's
Yeah.
very, I said, why don't you turn to her and tell her all about the churning? And he did.
Yeah.
And again, it was kind of more matter of fact, but she was like tearful and eating it
Yeah.
out because it doesn't share.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
really relative, and we have to really learn our clients
Yeah.
and be very accepting of their emotional fluency and the meaning of it. Right. So it's important. It's really, really important.
I think about a client, and I use this all the time with my supervisees, because they'll get the client that says, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah.
And one of the clients that you did a live with, Michael, the very, very, very shut down, withdrawn male partner, when I first started working around these things, he kept saying, I don't know. Like, what happens when this? I don't know. So I was just like, I'm going to lean into this place with him and just ask him tell me about that. What is that like? Just to not even know, not to know this part of you. You see your partner in distress
Yeah.
and you feel something, but it quickly goes away. you turn your head. I named all the body things and I said, but then you say, I don't know about this place. And he's like, yeah, that's not good. I was like, yeah, it doesn't feel very good. Yeah, I don't really know about this place. But then the enactment I did with him was, can you turn and let your partner know, right? That I can see that you're hurting, but then something happens and I don't know how to talk about it. And partner got teary. It wasn't like a grand revelation of a lot of things, but it was a willingness to share what was happening. And that was what his partner said. Was I was asking about the tears that came forward. She said, well, first of all, I just feel sad because his history is quite traumatized. But she goes, I feel sad because I know everything he's been through. And I just feel sad that he doesn't know anything about this part of him. Right. So even that was a meaningful enactment. And that was early on in therapy. But what I think it does, especially in those cases, it gives permission for people to not know and to feel like they're not failing because they don't know. It's actually a place of connection.
That's the beauty of just staying with present process, right?
Right. And to validate the not knowing.
Right.
Can really validate that. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So do we have a few minutes to talk about the self-of-therapist question that came up?
Yeah.
All right. Let's do this in a few minutes. Here we go.
The challenge. Okay.
It is a challenge, but this is something that comes up in EFT a lot, which is our ability as the therapist to tolerate, because we're running these emotions through us. We're having to tolerate and navigate a lot of emotion and move to. And one of the questions was about like pivoting away from it. How would you begin to talk about a way to begin to tolerate more emotion?
So you've got the best catchphrase for that.
I'm going to write it down and steal it.
We've talked about it before, in these moments when we find ourselves backing away from emotion or whatever's coming alive in the room. It doesn't have to just be, primary emotion or deep emotion. It can be escalation, whatever it is that we're moving away from. We want to ask ourselves, am I afraid because I don't know what to do? Or do I not know what to do because I'm afraid? Right? So that is the question. Is it, it's just a clinical skill that I need to build and that will help me? Or is it, am I getting triggered right now and I'm off balance? And because I'm off balance, I am reacting in a way that's kind of moving away and doing something else. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's the best way of talking about that I've ever heard. I love that. I love
Right.
and to the chase.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It does. And then if it is a matter of clinical skill, okay, then we can, build those muscles. But more importantly, and this is where the self of the therapist comes in. And by the way, that can also take people into self of the therapist. Like, I should know what's wrong with me. I've been through advanced core skills, right? That can take us down the rabbit hole of therapist shame, the hall of shame. But we all know that hall of shame.
Love it.
But the other one then begs a lot of questions. It's, what am I afraid of? What's coming up for me? Is this touching something personal in me? Is it, because as you were saying, Kristen, right, this isn't a highly experiential model. We're running a person's experience through us.
Yeah.
The therapist stance is to come alongside, which then opens us up to being touched. And sometimes it touches our own pain, our own fears, our own histories. They come alive in the room. So then it becomes a question of what's getting activated in me. And do I need to seek some supervision and some support so that I can be able to lean in clinically in these moments and get organized? Maybe I need to go to my own therapy.
Right.
I know that when I became an EFT therapist, it did not take long for me to have to go back into therapy because I was touching into parts of myself that I thought I had dealt with. But it wasn't until I was in an experiential model, an attachment-based experiential model, that brought some stuff alive for me in new ways. So those are some of my initial thoughts. What's getting activated and what kind of support do you need to put in place? Supervision, colleagues, therapy.
The only thing I'd want to add to that, I think that's awesome what you're talking about, is that, again, we'll go back to something we said a few minutes ago. We were talking about clients, but therapists too, we are where we are with our ability to tolerate raw emotion. Right? That's just a life process. It's a developmental process. And I do stump for everybody doing this model to do their own therapy work, because you can only walk the depths of somebody else's emotional experience if you've been able to really walk and tolerate your own depths. And not doing that, it puts such a low ceiling on things. and we are where we are. There was a woman, we used to barter with what used to be Argosy University, and we would scholarship some of their professors to the externship, and we got to use their space. It was awesome. And this one woman at the end said, "This was a great training. I realize, however, to do this work really well, I have to be much more in touch with my own
Right.
emotional world." And the thing I loved about what she said wasn't simply what she said. There was zero judgment. She wasn't judging herself. She wasn't
Yeah.
self-critical, but she was just making an observation. And I thought that's really true. We are where we are.
Mhm.
And if you really want to do this model well, we have to do our own work, right? We have to really endeavor to go to those places inside, because we will be so much more likely to be able to work well and walk at the depths with other people.
Yeah.
I would just say, one, accept where you are, no
Yeah.
judgment. Like that woman, I loved that. I was really
Yeah.
touched, and I'm not prone to do that. I'm insanely hard on myself. So I was like,
Yeah. I bet the idea of somebody going, "Oh, I just gotta do," I'm like, "What? You're so cool to yourself."
amazing. But it just speaks to just
Yeah.
really owning and honoring that part, because this is such emotionally evocative work, right? And it's good. It's not like if it brings up stuff in us, when it does, it always will, you know.
Yeah.
And
Doing
that's
No.
fluid, and our capacities are fluid,
Yeah.
right?
right.
Yeah.
The context that we're living in, of our
Yeah.
lives, of the world, of our communities, can absolutely impact our own capacities.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well,
that
we have to be
changes over
human.
time. That's
Yeah.
right.
And I can imagine, right? I work with some supervisees out in LA, and during the fires, it was like everybody, like it lowers even the therapist's capacity to
Yeah.
like how much
Right.
resource they have versus the demand happening around them. It does. It
Mhm.
impacts us. But I'll share
Yeah.
the story real fast because I think it's a poignant story. We were doing at a training. We were doing stage 2, which we're softening, and we're doing move 2. And the therapist that was doing it kept hitting a like pause, and then pause, and then looked over at me, and I was like, "It's okay. Try again. Reset. Try again." And they kept hitting this moment where they were talking about this really painful thing, trying to engage it, but their words kept getting lost. And so I said, "Okay, let's pause the role play." And I just said, "Can you sit back for a second?" And I asked, can you hear the story that's being, which is, if I don't keep showing my worth every single day, I'm going to be seen as invaluable, right? If I don't keep hustling for that worthiness." And I asked the participant, I said, is that something in you that can connect to that? And then just boom, kind of tears hit.
Mhm.
And we stay with
Mhm.
it for just a second. And then I said, okay, in a gentle way, I said, would you be able to provide just a reflection by touching into that part of you, and provide a reflection of what is happening for the role play? And then it rolled smoothly. Like it was like, I
Yeah.
have to let that hit me in some way. But if
Yes.
I'm trying to shelf that part of me, then I'm going to keep getting stuck with how do I reflect this thing that I don't want to feel at all going on inside of me? And I think that's what you're asking in that question that I will use from now on, which is it just a skill, or is there something happening with the fear that says,
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah.
Exactly.
well, cool. Well, very good. I think we should wrap it up here. We've covered a whole lot.
We
Yes, we
did.
have.
Yeah.
Really
Just want to
appreciate the
thank everybody
discussion.
for their questions again, too. They were
Yeah.
great. It was a very great conversation here.
Yeah. So thank you both for all that you've offered today. As always, a joy to sit and chat with you all about EFT and pick
Likewise.
apart these things and move to.
Yeah, it's been really nice. It's been great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Until next time, then.
Until next time.
All right.
Adios.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Emotionally Focused Therapy Podcast. We hope this podcast is an encouragement to your EFT journey, bringing clarity and understanding of EFT to your work. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts to stay up to date with each new episode. To learn more about training or supervision opportunities with Michael Barnett, go to michaelbarnettlpc.com. With Dr. Sylvina Irwin, go to drsylvinairwin.com. And with Michael Preston, go to michaelprestonlpc.com. Tune in again next time to hear more of this great conversation.